So, create task day one. Let's take a look at a few things first, and then we'll jump right in. First, some calendar stuff. At this point, you should have completed all of the purple lessons, considering there are walkthroughs and you had lots of time to do it. The due date for those is today, or Friday, and that doesn't mean I'm going to grade them at midnight, but if you want to guarantee you have full credit on time for them, get them done. You've had plenty of time. Other things to note are that the first planning guide, of course, we will go over it. The first planning guide for the create task is due right before spring break. You should have it done halfway through today's class, but I'm putting it out there in case people aren't here or get a chance to figure out what's needed. That will possibly be the last assignment for the third quarter, which is way out in front of the actual end of the third quarter, which is a week and 2 days after we get back from spring break. The project we are about to do is going to extend into the fourth quarter, and its various components will make up the majority of your fourth quarter grade. So you need to do it. Now, a important heads up, if you are in a situation where you are concerned about even receiving credit for this class, it is in your best interest to make sure that you get a C for the third quarter. And unfortunately, people in that position are not always listening. But regardless, getting your assignments, getting your grade up, including with late work, before the end of the third quarter, you get at least a C. It doesn't matter if you get an E for the fourth quarter, you will still get credit. So that's important. Okay, so on to the task itself. A couple things to clear up. Everything for the project is original and individual. If you see things somewhere in documents that say partner, it is not a partner thing. The limitations of partner interaction are general idea things, but there is no group programming. The other thing to note is that there are documents available in the create task unit, which you can get to now directly to the create task unit or go to your current unit in my documents, and it will be a full unit. There are documents available in the various student resources links, which sometimes some people go to, that look very similar to survival guide and planning assignment and everything like that. Do not use those documents. Only use the ones from this calendar spreadsheet. They have been split into different documents to make sure that you are focusing on the assignment and the important parts, and they've been adapted because this project is for everybody. Everybody needs to do this. It is all assignments for this class. Now, if you are taking the AP test, you will upload its various components to the College Board, but you will already have them done because you did them for assignments in this class. I will do my best to talk as little as possible about the actual AP test components, or not components, slight variations, because I don't want to confuse people. But you'll see after we actually submit this, after you actually complete this for the class, we'll go over the specifics for maximizing your points when you submit it to the actual College Board if you're taking the test. Okay, so that is not going to be until April 30th, which we will have it. Our project for everybody who wants to pass this class is going to be due pretty early into the fourth quarter, somewhere around there, to give you some scope of where we are headed. All right, so let's talk about the project itself. go ahead and open up the document called Create Performance Task Survival Guide. It should look very similar. Let's close all these things. And this is where we're actually going to discuss what you are actually doing, what your actual app is. Your actual project consists of 3 different components, all of which are based on the app that you create. You are going to create an original program that meets the requirements, and you're going to present that in these 3 different components. So the grade will be on you submitting a PDF of your program code, but you will not be able to do that unless you write a program. Hopefully that distinction is understood. So the 3 components, the first 2 are a grand total of 10 minutes once you have your app written. A PDF of your program code, which there's a excellent tool called CodePrint that you're just going to copy your program code into and then print the PDF of, which is super easy. The second component is a screen capture of your video, a screen capture video of your program working. It needs to show what it does. It needs to show an example of what it does. It doesn't need to go to every screen. If your app has bugs in it, I recommend not demonstrating them. Like if one of your screens doesn't do what it's supposed to, don't go to that screen in the video. Seems kind of obvious, but I just want to make sure we are interested in the presentation of the project as much as the meat. And the last portion is the written response, which the written response we'll talk about in detail later, but the majority of your grade is actually from the written response assignment. But the various answers are based on your app, and that your app has the level of complexity and uses the tools that it needs. So they're all sort of integrated as far as getting your points. So the survival guide, we were just here already. Okay, the point of this guide is that you do already have the skills needed to do this app. The point is to demonstrate those. This is a creative opportunity. This is all original stuff. Do not submit stuff you find on the internet. I have seen all of it. Some of it is mine. The people that grade this project for the College Board have seen all of them. They are all teachers like me. Do not submit other people's work. You'll get a 0. Super easy, or super clear. Okay. You need to, for this guide, the point of this guide, highlight tricky parts of the task requirements, plan out your ideas. There's a schedule. You'll see different places, 9 or 12 hours. We will be spending more than either of those in class time. And of course, you can work on this outside of class. And some basic checklists to make sure that you're meeting the requirements. There are some College Board resources that are available, like scoring guidelines and other requirements, but what you need to know is the things I discuss are required for the project, for this class, for the grade, and that completing those requirements will set you up, will make sure you have the components to get your College Board points. Okay, and the mindset for this project, this is using skills that you have gathered all year, in the programming at least, and the make lessons, they should have that in quotes, but the lessons where you had to make things independently, at least partially, are great examples. And you'll see the actual examples of these projects or the good examples of these projects are projects we've done in class. They should be familiar. Okay, you're ready for this moment because you've been practicing all year. All right. So what is required of the actual app? You need to have an input and an output. The user needs to do a thing, and then something needs to happen. This sounds obvious and hard to create something that doesn't have this characteristic. The only example I can think of is the digital scene app, like the Under the Sea one and the whatever original one you did, where the app just ran when you hit run, and that was it. That didn't have any input or output. I guess technically it didn't output the screen, but the user didn't do anything, and therefore there's no input. It would not meet that requirement. Second and third are the crux of this entire project. First, your app needs to use a list. It needs to use a list to store information, which is really the only thing you do with a list, but it needs to manage complexity. You'll see the phrase manage complexity, and that means simplify the way the program works. If you are using a list to its potential, meaning adding things to it as the program goes, appending items, looping through the list, traversals, we've done those. Those all are satisfying the requirement of managing complexity and the requirement for here, where you need to use a list. You can use the get columns, meaning the data tables, and data tables are a great jumping off point, considering we just did a data table project. And your data table project that you did for the assignment in the last unit meets most of the requirements. You cannot submit the same thing. It needs to be different than your last project. Completely. Not just an adaptation. All right. The other major requirement is that your app has a student developed, do they have student developed here? A function that is original. And student developed, we'll talk about what that means later, as it can't be the event handler. You're going to need event handlers if the user does anything, but you're going to write one function, at least one function, but there will be one function that you plan on being your shining example of meeting all of the requirements. And I should say did not. It needs to have the following characteristics. It needs to receive a parameter. It needs to have a conditional, and it needs to have a loop. We have done all these things many times. If you don't have a function that has these things, you're going to lose a ton of points. And really, like I said, most of the points come from the written response document, but you're going to use whatever function you planned on using as your example and talk about that in your written response. Okay, the phrases you'll see a lot are sequencing, selection, and iteration. Sequencing just means the function runs in an order. There are things that happen at different times, which I don't know how you can't have a function, how you'd have a function that didn't have sequencing. Selection just means a conditional, an if statement, and iteration just means a loop, specifically looping through a list. If you have a function, like almost any one of our filter functions, if it loops through a list and every time through the loop checks something, there you go. There is your function that meets the requirements. And you need to cite any outside sources, sounds, what have you. That's not too hard to do, and you'll put it in the comments. You'll put it in a comment in your program code, and that's how you will do it. All right, so some examples to double check, make sure everybody knows what is required. Here are some examples of functions. They use the term algorithm, but here it's interchangeable. The point of this is to put you in the mindset of the reader, which is the mindset you should have for the entire project, thinking about the requirements and working backwards from there. Here we have some functions that do or do not meet the requirements of sequencing, selection, and iteration. And I'll give you a second to think about this, being able to identify the difference. First one, we have a function called repeat word, receives 2 parameters, does a thing in order, so it's sequencing. We have a loop, our for loop, and every time it just increments return word or concats and returns return word. There is no conditional. This has no if statements. It does not meet the requirement. Second one, increase score, receives a parameter called points, and it just increases the score by 1 and checks the score. If it's greater than 10 end game, runs that function. The issue that this one has, also, it doesn't have a loop. It does have a conditional, but it receives a parameter. It doesn't use the parameter. That is a requirement of the parameter that I haven't said yet, but it's sort of implied that if your function is receiving a parameter, which it must, it needs to use that parameter somewhere in the function. It needs to contribute to the function working. So this misses it on those 2 occasions. Algorithm 3, function 3. Function's called add list, receives a parameter called list, which it uses. It has a loop. It traverses the list called list, and it does every time it increments or increases the total. There's no conditional here. Your conditional is probably, and the best example is to be inside of your loop, although you can write a conditional somewhere else as long as it's contributing to your program somewhere else in the function, like checking if a list is empty before you do some things. That's a conditional. But our traversal and conditional setup is what you will most likely be using. This one has no conditional statement anywhere in the function. And the last one, add positives, receives a list, which list is used as the length of the loop. It has a couple other variables, that's fine. Inside of the loop, it has a conditional. There you go, it meets the requirement. These functions should not look too foreign to you. I mean, maybe because they're in text mode, but the components shouldn't look foreign. This is the stuff we've been doing a lot of and exclusively. So some timeline stuff, it's again generalized, and we are going to have more than 12 in-class hours. 12 in-class hours for us is 8 blocks, and counting today, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 puts us there. Like I said, it'll probably be there as the finish, which, again, any sort of suggested completion timeline is, you know, a timeline. And what's surprisingly common is students getting halfway through the allotted time, realizing their project is not a good project idea for one of a couple reasons that we'll go over, and completely starting over and doing well in only half the time because they know what doesn't work and they're not, you know, fiddling about doing things that don't work or aren't going to get you to the requirement. Okay, so let's look at the app planning assignment for points. In case you're wondering, this is for points. This is the only deliverable of these documents. The others are references. And this app planning assignment for points is due before spring break. But like I said, if you're doing it now, which there's no reason not to do it now, you'll be done with it in 15 minutes. Of work, it'll take us more than 15 minutes to get through it because we're going to talk about it. But let's Let's talk about it. Okay, so like I said, there are several reasons why students' ideas do not work or end up not working. And they generally fall into the category of too complex or not complex enough. Too complex is what we're going to see some examples of, and we're going to practice narrowing it down. Not complex enough is coming up with an idea that doesn't really have a need for a list or a function that runs a parameter or something like that. You could write a fantastic game that's fun to play and you market it and make $1 billion or something like that. If it doesn't use a list, it's going to lose almost all of your points. If it doesn't have a function that receives a parameter, uses a loop, and a conditional, you're going to lose almost all the points. It doesn't matter how innovative and entertaining or useful your app is, it needs to meet the requirements. So the best way to meet the requirements are narrowing down complex assignments, okay, like we're going to do here. So how to narrow it down? Narrow down, taking a larger idea, blah, 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 getting rid of things we don't need, identifying your functions and lists early. Don't go into your idea without knowing how you are going to use a list or what data you're going to use a list for. Okay, if you have a big plan, simplify it, cut out some features that may be nice but are not necessary, and looks don't matter. You don't need to have a super beautiful interactive situation. That's not what they're grading. Feel free. It doesn't hurt, but it's not necessary. Like, not even the themes are required. There's no reason not to use one of the design themes, but enough on design considering, like I said, it doesn't matter. All right, so practice narrowing it down. This is deliverables. You need to do this for points. This document is an assignment. You should make a copy of it so that you can submit it to the assignment. Let's talk about practicing narrowing it down. Here are some descriptions of project ideas. You're going to come up with 2 or 3 ways to narrow it down. And once it's narrowed down in your way, think about ways that you could use a list and your algorithm, meaning your function or general plan for meeting the requirements. So project 1, here's my idea. I want to build a tic-tac-toe game. The user creates an account if they don't already have one and are taken to the main board game. From there, the player will play against a computer in either easy, intermediate, or advanced mode. So I need to write the code for the computer player. When the game is over, the lifetime win total is updated. I will keep track of how long the game took. All right, take a couple minutes and first come up with ways that you could simplify that. And once it's simplified, how are you going to use a list and how are you going to use functions? In fact, I should clarify this. if you would like, you can format your list and function opportunities like this. It's not required, but I think it would help. Although that's mostly for people that haven't made the copy yet. Why did I not put up? Let's go. It seems like a lot. Let's go. Oh man. You know, games. All right. So how can we narrow this down? So my first thought reading this is to get rid of the user account. I actually might consider keeping that because it is a great way to use a list. If you just have a basic list of users or username, password, you might not want to make an app that is focused on username and password login screen, which we have done before. There was a lemon and lime guessing or mouse over game, but it would be a way that you could use a list, which this is a tic-tac-toe game. Games are notoriously difficult to find reasons to use a list. You use lists to keep track of information. Games don't always need to keep track of multiple pieces of information. Obviously, score, time, lives, that sorts of thing are super common in games, but they aren't list type. They wouldn't need a list. But there are other ways. As far as the rest of this, having a computer player strategy, first of all, having 3 different levels of difficulty is completely unnecessary. But even writing an app that uses computer strategy might be a bridge too far. Just having an app that a tic-tac-toe game that checks for game over and is designed to be player 1 and player 2, that's fine. That's a lot less algorithm writing and more making sure the framework works. And keeping track of total wins, that's not really getting us anywhere. If it's win total, that would be a single variable. That's not a real list opportunity unless you had lists that corresponded to dates and you're keeping track of time, that something, but that's not necessarily. And also how long game took, that's a single variable. You might keep a list of game lengths as a way of, some more data you could use a list for, or games that you won and lost, keep that in a list, but it's kind of a stretch. And you might start to see that games are not great examples for this project. Okay, project 2. I volunteer at a local health clinic, so I want to build a health app. The user can record information about what they eat, how much they sleep, exercise, blood pressure, weight, Based on the information provided, the app will provide recommendations to the user about how they can improve their health, both diet and exercise. Users can personalize the look of the app with different theme colors. What are 2 or 3 ways you can simplify that? And once it is simplified in your manner and you're choosing, what data could you keep track of in a list? And essentially, if we're just circling around it, want to nail it exactly, you want your function to use the list you're talking about. I don't think that is explicitly a requirement, but when you're talking about function ideas, think about ways you can use the list in that function. Ready, go. Okay, so how would we narrow this down? We could keep track of fewer data types or fewer types of health information. Just keeping track of diet or sleep or any one of these would be fine. It's not that much harder to increase the number of things that you keep track of, but it's not necessary. As far as providing recommendations, there's an easy way to do this, like writing parameters for sleep. And if the user puts in an amount of sleep that's less than a certain amount or more than a certain amount, you return some sort of canned answer about getting more sleep type of thing. And actually, just having a sleep recorded app or an app designed to record sleeping lengths is a great example. You have the user's input. Each of their inputs is going to be added to the list. You can average that list pretty easily. You loop through the list and add up all the numbers and divide by list.length. You can check to see if the amount of sleep they're getting meets some parameter. And like I said, return something. But there's no reason to have all of the different data sources. Recommendation, like I said, it is also not required for this app to meet. Just keeping track of one of the things and recording it is probably enough you would need some other complexity to get your loop conditional working, but that would be fine. And there's no reason to have customizable color themes. There's not really a list opportunity there. There's some basic set property stuff, but it's not getting you closer to the finish line at all. So, like I said, list opportunities, keeping track of any of these things would be a great place for a list. Anytime you're getting information from the user, there you go. And function opportunities, depends what data you're keeping, but looping through that list and checking for something is meeting the requirements. And the last one, the last of these, narrow it down. This is an assignment for points part, is I think that'll build an app that allows the user to quickly record stats during a basketball game. The app will show a picture of the court. The user taps on the court to indicate something has happened there. They are presented with a quick menu like shot attempt, foul, steal, rebound, etc. Then they select from another list which player did it. At the end of the game, it displays a stat sheet for all the players and the stats for that game. How can you simplify this? And how can you use a list to help it? Okie dokie. All right. So how can we narrow this down? You could always eliminate some of these statistics. Remember, you don't have to make the best basketball statistic app. You need to make one that uses the tools that are required. You could get rid of, like I said, you get rid of some of these different options. There is a plan here for tapping the part of the court where the action happened. You could get rid of the the display, the visualization of the court, even though we did have a practice example at some point, the basketball stat app, where it was just made or missed, but it was pretty clean. You could, like I said, you could get rid of the actual court and just have them choose make or miss. You could, I think they are saying you could drop the end of game stat sheet, but you need some way to have an output. The example that we did, I don't remember what lesson it was from, but it just had the running stats. The updated stats were on the main screen, so you could see how it was changing. So you don't necessarily need another screen, although adding another screen and having the different stats shown on it doesn't add that much. So list opportunities, anything you're keeping track of is a list opportunity. You would, of course, need a list of players or player numbers to keep track of things if you were going with this style. I wouldn't count the list of player numbers as the list that is helping manage. I mean, I guess it technically is, but I would focus on anything, any list that is growing as the app runs, something that's collecting information or filtering and that sort of thing. And function opportunities, thinking about what is a reason you would need to go through the list. You would loop through the list looking for to match a player's name. Maybe your output could be by player, and in your filtered list you look through and try to find that player's number and return all the information that is correlated to that player's number. That's super easy. If you understood what I just said, that's maybe an hour of programming tops to get it to work. So it's not, doesn't need to be that complex. Okay, choosing your idea. Some brainstorming. Remember, the characteristic of brainstorming is just throwing out your ideas, not throwing out as disposing, but providing your ideas. And your project idea doesn't have to be the thing you go with, but it's something to get you started. And so some ideas, it is beneficial to have it be about a topic you're interested in. It is not required. And it's only a benefit in that it may tend to make it more interesting to work on. And you can, as you go, feel the satisfaction of making something that you like, but liking the topic doesn't get you any points. So be aware of that. Having a clear purpose. What is the point? Should be able stated in one sentence. Okay, what's called the elevator pitch in Hollywood means you gotta be able to say the idea very quickly. Like, meaning you have the goal focused. Narrow it down. We did narrow it down before. Narrowing it down also has the same basic thing. If you're familiar with the term feature creep, means it's the phenomenon of as something's being created, built, designed to come up with other things, other features, other interfaces, experience type of thing that would improve it, but forces you to lose focus on the goal. So narrowing it down includes avoiding feature creep. And you don't use this as an opportunity. You shouldn't use this as an opportunity to learn new skill. Well, don't plan on something that will require you to learn new programming skills, which is a weird thing to say. And it is not required to learn a new programming skill. You can use all the skills that you already have obtained, hopefully, in this project. Okay, brainstorm 2 project ideas that that would work for the create task and then you will discuss it with a classmate and get some basic feedback. Hey, for all of them, just directly, what is the purpose? How can you narrow it down to the focus? What are you going to keep track of in a list? How are you going to meet the function requirements? And do you already have the skills to make the project? And this should take you, between writing it and conferring with your classmate, about 10 minutes. And I will give you time for that. We have one more. After this, we still have one more thing to go over. But this is what you are doing now for points. Ready, go. Actually, that's where instruction is going to end for today, now that I think about it.